Hi, everybody. Another day of reading The Forests of Silence by Emily Rodda. We're up to chapter 2 today. The title of the chapter is, once I get to the right page, The Belt of Deltora. Where we left chapter 1, we had young Jared going off to read secretly in the library to find out everything he could about the belt. And hopefully we find out some more now. Here we go. After hours of searching, Jared finally found a book that he thought might help him. It was covered in faded pale blue cloth, and the gold lettering on the outside had been worn away. But the title inside was still very clear. The Belt of Deltora, its history, its power, and its magic. This book was nothing like the splendid hand-painted volumes that he and Endon read in the schoolroom, and nothing like the many other weighty books on the library shelves. It was small, thin, and very dusty. It had been tucked away in the library's darkest corner among piles of papers, as though someone had wanted it forgotten. Jared carried the old book carefully to a table. He planned to read it from beginning to end. His task might take him all night, but he did not expect to be disturbed. No one would be looking for him. Endon would go straight from the great hall to the chapel where his father's body lay surrounded by candles. He would keep watch there alone till dawn, following the rule. Poor Endon, thought Jared. It has only been a few days since he did the same for his mother. Now he is alone in the world, as I am. But at least we have each other. We are friends to the death, and I will protect him as best I can. Protect him from what? The question pierced his mind like a sharp knife. Why had he suddenly begun to fear for Endon? Who or what could threaten the all-powerful king of Deltora? I am tired, thought Jared. I am imagining things. He shook his head impatiently and lit a fresh candle to brighten the darkness. But the memory of Prandine's thin smile as he locked the magic belt away kept drifting into his mind like the shadow of a remembered nightmare. He frowned, lowered his head to the book, turned to the first page, and began to read. These are the words from inside the book. In ancient days, Deltora was divided into 7 tribes. The tribes fought on their borders, but otherwise stayed in their own place. Each had a gem from deep within the earth, a talisman with special powers. There came a time when the enemy from the Shadowlands cast greedy eyes on Deltora. The tribes were divided, and singly none of them could repel the invader, who began to triumph. A hero called Endon rose from the ranks of the people. He was an ordinary man, a blacksmith who made swords and armor and shoes for horses. But he had been blessed with strength, courage, and cleverness. One night Endon dreamed of a special and splendid belt, 7 steel medallions beaten to the thinness of silk, and connected together with fine chain. To each medallion was fixed one of the tribal gems. Realizing that the dream had been sent to him for a purpose, Endon worked in secret over many months to create a likeness of the belt he had been shown. Then he traveled around the kingdom to persuade each tribe to allow its talisman to be added to it. The tribes were at first suspicious and wary, but one by one, desperate to save their land, they agreed. As each gem became part of the belt, its tribe grew stronger, but the people kept their strength secret and bided their time. And when at last the belt was complete, Adin fastened it around his waist, and it flashed like the sun. Then all the tribes united behind him to form a great army, and together they drove the enemy from their land. And so Adin became the first king of the united tribes of Deltora, and he ruled the land long and wisely. But he never forgot that he was a man of the people, and that their trust in him was the source of his power. Neither did he forget that the enemy, though defeated, was not destroyed. He knew that the enemy is clever and sly, and that to its anger and envy 1,000 years is like the blink of an eye. So he wore the belt always, and never let it out of his sight. Jared read on, and the more he read, the more troubled he became. He had a pencil and some paper in his pocket, but he did not need to take notes. The words of the book seemed to be burning themselves into his brain. He was learning more than he expected, not just about the belt of Deltora, but about the rule. Here is more words from the book. The first to leave the belt aside was Adin's grandson, King Elstrad, who in his middle years grew fat with good living and found the steel cut sadly into his belly. Elstrad's chief adviser soothed his fears, saying that the belt need only be worn on great occasions. Elstrad's daughter, Queen Adina, followed her father's ways, wearing the belt only 5 times in her reign. Her son, King Brandon, wore it only 3 times, and at last it became the custom for the belt only to be worn on the day the heir took the throne. At the urging of his chief adviser, King Brandon caused the Ralad builders to raise a great palace on the hill at the centre of the city of Del. The royal family moved from the old blacksmith's forge to the palace, and over time it became the custom for them to remain within its walls, where no harm could come to them. When Jared closed the book at last, his heart was heavy, his candle had burned low, and the first dawn light was showing through the window. He sat for a moment thinking. Then he slipped the book into his shirt and ran to seek Endon. The chapel was below ground level, in a quiet corner of the palace. It was still and cold. The old king's body was lying on a raised marble platform in the centre, surrounded by candles. Endon was kneeling beside it, with his head bowed. He looked up as Jared burst in. His eyes were red with weeping. "You should not be here, Jared," he whispered. "It is against the rule." "It is dawn," Jared panted, "and I had to see you." Endon stood up stiffly and came over to him. "What is it?" he asked in a low voice. Jared's head was full of everything he had read. The words came tumbling out of him. "Endon, you should wear the belt of Deltora always, as the ancient kings and queens did." Endon stared at him in puzzlement. "Come," Jared urged, taking his arm. "Let us go and get it now." But Endon held back, shaking his head. "You know I cannot do that, Jared. The rule." Jared stamped his foot with impatience. "Forget the rule. It is just a collection of traditions that have grown up over the years and been made law by the chief advisers. It is dangerous, Endon. Because of it, every new ruler of Deltora has been more powerless than the one before. This must stop. With you. You must get the belt and put it on. Then you must come with me outside the palace gates." He was speaking too fast and too wildly. By now, Endon was frowning, backing away from him. "You are ill, my friend," he was whispering nervously, "or you have been dreaming." No, Jared insisted, following him. It is you who are living in a dream. You must see how things are outside the palace, in the city and beyond. I see the city, Jared, argued Endon. I look out at it from my window every day. It is beautiful. But you do not talk to the people. You do not walk among them. Of course I do not. That is forbidden by the rule, Endon gasped. But I know that all is well. Ah, you know nothing except what you are told by Brandine, shouted Jared. And is that not enough? The cold voice cut through the air like sharp steel. It's the end of that chapter. Some interesting reading. I want you to have a think about some observations from it. For example, what powers do you think the Belt of Deltora really has? What do you think the average people in the city of Deltora think of the chief advisors and the king and the royal family? And how much do you think those chief advisors really know about the belt and everything going on? I'll see you next time for the next chapter of The Forests of Silence.